Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for the introduction. Of course, it's a great debate. Who has better wine, whether the Macedonians, Georgians, Croatians, or others? It's a happy debate, and it's in line of the things that we are discussing today, the cultural diplomacy. I would start with the most famous saying of a Macedonian revolutionary in the history who said that I understand the world as a field for cultural competition between the peoples. And this is how we try to see the world today, as one of the smaller countries in the region, but with a culture and history that we are proud of, as all the other nations and peoples in the region. However, it is often said that the region that we come from, the Balkans, is very good at producing history, and it is said that we are producing more history than we can consume. Very often this overproduction of history is causing certain difficulties in the region, certain conflicts. Nevertheless, we try to emphasize on the cultural part and the cultural heritage and the richness that the cultures in the region are giving to our nations. The region that we come from, the Balkans, is the place where different cultures, religions were interacting with during the history. It is a part where Europe crosses into Asia, where the Christianity and Islam are interacting with each other. And I must say that we are, in a way, proud that we have maintained the cohesion of the region over the centuries, not only in the last 25 or 30 years where there were certain difficulties, but throughout the centuries, both major religions have managed to live together. And in fact, this has been our greatest preparation for entrance into, for example, the European Union, which is the family of different cultures where the culture of each member state is protected. So I would say that the cultural diplomacy is also an aspect that is taken into consideration into the internal affairs of each of the countries in the region, because there is no country in the Balkans that is ethnically homogeneous or culturally or religiously homogeneous. So we have to respect each other's cultures within the countries first, and then the cultures of our neighbors, and later the cultures of the other parts of Europe, ultimately the member states of the European Union and their own cultures. The title of my address today is Macedonia's Peacebuilding Experience and how that worked in the context of the cultural diplomacy. I must say that those who have followed the modern history of the region are aware that with the breakup of former Yugoslavia, there was a great danger for long-term instability and bloodsheds on the Balkans. And Macedonia was the republic of former Yugoslavia at the very south, which was and still is landlocked, without significant natural resources, with different ethnic groups, different religions, and different cultures, and had all the potentials to become another battlefield on the Balkans. Nevertheless, the focusing on the interethnic and interreligious coexistence and the peaceful living of all different groups together was the reason why Macedonia was the only country, the only republic of former Yugoslavia that gained its independence in a peaceful manner. Even Slovenia, which is, let's say, the most prosperous and was the most prosperous economically, a part of Yugoslavia, had a 2-week war in the early 90s. Nevertheless, Macedonia was the country that gained its independence from Yugoslavia without a single bullet shot, exactly because our political elites at that time had the maturity, and as a nation we had the experience of preventing inter-ethnic conflicts. Of course, times have not always been on the positive sides, we did have our own challenges, we did have our own difficulties, but not at the scale that other parts of the Balkans have seen during those times. So the focus on the coexistence and respecting each other's cultures was, I would say, dominant, instead of spreading of the nationalism and starting conflicts on the national or religious grounds. And I must say that it has been the reason why today, 8 years later, Macedonia still manages to maintain its stability on the interethnic level. And the peace-building experiences that we have had have been, in fact, asked as an example from other parts of Europe and other parts of the world. Our focus is that the outcome of every war is ultimately peace. So no matter what conflict you start, it has to end with a peace. And at the end, no matter which side is formally the winning or the losing side, there are losses on each of the sides that have entered the conflict. So therefore, focusing on the respect of the heritage or the cultural heritage of all different groups in the region should be taken into account when we are talking about the future. And as I said, since all our countries in the region are seeking to enter the European Union, some have entered, like Slovenia and Croatia, the ultimate goal of the region is to enter the European Union, where all our cultures would be protected, but on the other hand, we will be living with the cultures of the others. Some parts of Europe do not have that experience. We are, as I said, a part where the cultural coexistence has been visible in the centuries before, and we are very well prepared to enter a wider family, because each of our countries presents a smaller family with different backgrounds and cultures. There are challenges ahead, of course. Ambassador Žužul mentioned the forthcoming integration processes, the European and Euro-Atlantic integration processes. The region of the Balkans is the region where we have so-called old European Union member states like Greece. We have new European Union member states like Bulgaria and Slovenia. We have Croatia, which is the latest European Union member state. We have candidate countries. We have countries that are already negotiating. We have potential candidate countries. And we have countries with so-called European vocation. So once they fulfill the conditions, they will certainly become part of the European Union. And I would say this European Union perspective is the sole thing that unites all the people in the region as a group, but also unites all the different factors within each of the countries. So the European perspective would be a unifying factor within the countries first, and then a unifying factor between the countries in the region. All the conflicts in the Balkans have started about borders, as in all other cases around the world. Nevertheless, the absurdity of the region would be that thousands of victims have been caused to create borders and to establish independence of different countries in order to enter the European Union, which is a union where there are no borders. So it is a process that I once called the reintegration of the disintegrated region, meaning that, for example, we had former Yugoslavia where different nations were living together. Then we entered into process of independence of all these countries, which was a historical result of their struggle for independence. And then later, all of these countries would enter the European Union in order not to have borders with each other again. So I would say that 20 or 30 years from now, maybe history will judge some of the decisions that were made 20 years ago. But we cannot change the course of the history. We can only learn from the past. Ultimately, all the countries would become member states of the European Union, and also some of them that want to join NATO would ultimately become member states of NATO. But I see the European side of this integration process as the dominant one, because it also includes different factors than the NATO integration process. So I would say that I would be more optimistic today about the integration of the region into the European structures than I used to be 5 or 10 years ago. There are different challenges, not only for the region, there are challenges for the European Union as a structure. Some people would say that the conflicts on the Balkans in the 90s were a result of the lack of action on behalf of the European Union. We are aware that in the early 90s we had the creation of the so-called European Common Foreign and Security Policy, and many authors have described it as this is the hour of Europe. Europe has to act. Nevertheless, Europe had its own difficulties in acting on the Balkans, but I'm sure that the history lessons have been learned also on the European side, and the only decision to prevent further conflicts on the Balkans and to maintain long-term stability is to fully integrate these countries into the European Union as full member states. I would say that this idea is not maybe 5 years from its completion, but in 12 to 15 years from now we would be able to see the Balkans fully integrated into the European Union. A union where we can all focus on trade and culture and education, healthcare, instead of focusing on issues that are causing conflicts today on the Balkans. On the other hand, I would say that we should also compete with other countries in terms of who has better wine, in terms of who had better history leaders, or who was right 50, 100 or 200 years ago. And it would be an ideal world for somebody, but we should not stop hoping. We should continue working towards that goal, and events like this, as the Conference on Cultural Diplomacy, are exactly an event where we can share our views in that direction, and I would like to thank the organizers for inviting us today. Thank you for the attention.
Please briefly introduce yourself too.
Yes, I can.
Okay. Okay.
Macedonia is having elections, and what do you see in the current situation? Is it for European government having or not? It is a new EU would enter in the future because of Brexit.
Mm-hmm.
Brexit means a huge fall. And also the new NATO declared recently as obsolete by Mr. Trump, the President Trump, and now it is a tool again that if you don't pay the 2% of the GDP, you're not valid, so it has become a commercial issue. I mean, there is a debate, not only in Macedonia, but also about joining NATO or not, because of this great price tag. Anyhow, the other thing that I haven't heard you talk about is the name Macedonia. You are not in conflict, but in discussion with Greece.
Mm-hmm.
And those discussions that took place a couple of weeks ago did not really materialize in giving you a name. Is there any debate in your country for another name so that you can finally enter our family? And you mentioned the security issue in Europe that was
Mm-hmm.
presented in the notice. This was always prevented by the
Okay. Yes, many questions. Thank you. Try to be short, although it's not very feasible. But okay. First, we'll start with the new Europe that we were about to enter. Yeah, I recently read last week in one of the newspapers a joke that in terms of the further European integration, the optimists would say that Turkey would enter during the Albanian presidency. The pessimists would say that Albania would enter during the Turkish presidency. I would also, you mentioned Brexit. I would mention an anecdote that I had in the late 90s with a friend from Germany. And he said, by the time Macedonia enters the European Union, Germany will leave. Meaning that the European integration process is not always a process of optimism. It is a process where things are, of course, changing. As you said, there is a new Europe. Entering the European Union today is not the same as it was entering it 30 years ago. The criteria for Croatia that entered recently have not been the same that Spain was about to satisfy in 1986 or Greece in 1981 or the Scandinavian countries in the 90s, 95. So we are aware that the criteria are stricter, but we would like to, we are not seeking for a shortcut. We are seeking to fulfill all the criteria. But we are also asking not to create additional obstacles that have not existed in the past. In other words, we are not favorable towards a process where the rules of the game are being changed once the game has started. Nevertheless, we continue to do all these reforms to satisfy the European standards. No matter which political party is in the government, your question was whether we have a pro-EU government. We have always had a government that is in favor of the European Union accession and NATO accession. Since our independence in 1991, there was a strategic orientation for these two directions, and it has never been abandoned by any of the governments, any of the political parties, any ethnic groups, or any significant social actor, I would say, which is followed up by wide support in the public opinion polls, wide support for membership into the European Union and NATO. And we are aware that all these sometimes painful criteria to enter the European Union are not done in order to satisfy the needs of the European Union, but they're done to provide benefits for our own citizens. So if we have better system, better legal system, or better system in the fight against corruption or organized crime, or better education, or better protection of the environment, this will not bring benefits for the citizens of Sweden or Germany or Portugal. It will bring benefits for the citizens of Macedonia. And this is the primary reason why we are continuing to do all these reforms. Even, hypothetically, even if we never enter the European Union, the process of European accession and satisfying the European standards would provide results for our citizens. And ultimately, even if we don't have a final outcome, full EU membership, the process of accession brings a number of benefits for the citizens, and we are motivated to continue on that path. In terms of NATO, you said it's a different NATO too. We are aware of that. I wouldn't say that NATO has lost its role, but it has a different role today than it had 20, 30, or 50 years ago. We do come from a region that has been prone to instability in the past. And I wouldn't compare our region to other parts of the world in terms of sensitivity to conflicts, because no other region is the same as the Balkans. that is also valid for NATO and also valid for the European Union. You know, there are many people who say, well, our countries in the Balkans, we can survive and have better life without the European Union, just as Norway or Iceland has, you know. But Iceland is surrounded by fish, you know. We are not surrounded by fish. We are in a completely different environment with completely different circumstances. And taking into account the experience of the countries from our region that have gone through the European integration process, we can see that all of them have gone to a process of economic prosperity, decrease of the unemployment, increase of the foreign direct investment, and increase of the living standard. I'm talking about countries that relatively recently joined the European Union, like Croatia or Bulgaria, our host today, or Romania, or even Greece, which is neighboring us. We still remember what was the situation in Greece before they entered the European Union and what it was after they entered the European Union, and ultimately what it is today. So we can directly witness the results of the European integration process and the benefits for the citizens. Is there anything I forgot? Yes, well, we don't need a new name. We do have a name. Our name is Republic of Macedonia, and it has been the name that we have always identified with. There are discussions about the difference that our neighbors from Greece have with our name. It is a process that goes on for 25 years now. It is an ongoing debate. It's not an easy question. The point is that Greece is a full member state of the European Union and NATO, and they have blocked our accession into the European Union and NATO. By doing that, they have violated an international agreement we have signed in '95. Both countries in '95 signed an agreement at the UN saying that Greece will not object Macedonia's membership into international organizations, for which we took Greece to the International Court of Justice. The International Court of Justice ruled in our favor, saying that Greece is wrong, Macedonia is right. Nevertheless, we don't have an international police to enforce the International Court of Justice decisions. And we are continuing to talk with our friends from Greece. There is no situation of conflicts or hostility between the two nations and between the people of both countries. On the contrary, Greece is one of the largest investors in the Republic of Macedonia. The primary destination for summer holidays of 90% of the Macedonians is the Greek coast. There is increased every flow of trade and people and exchange in education, culture, or other areas. And it is a process that may or may not produce results in the foreseeable future. We will continue to talk because it is an obligation that we have signed in 1995, and hopefully we will be able to reach a solution soon.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think that we can take one more question.
Yes.
Is there somebody else interested in the question? We'll take one more question.
My name is Sufi Lagari. I'm with the Sydney Foundation. Some nations are martial nations, some are not martial nations. As from your own personal, means the peace-building experience, how possible and what will possible bring the peace among, if there is issues between martial and not martial, and continue, especially in Asia, I have seen movies, I've seen. How possible? What is the best way, a cultural diplomacy or as a diplomat? How you see that? How the possible?
How to reach eternal peace? Okay. So I would say that many philosophers during the history have sought for the answer. Many different philosophers and thinkers have sought for the answer of this question. But from the experience that we have, not only our generation today, but generations before, I can talk about our experience, is that we have to focus on first on building the characters of the future generations. Starts with the education, of course. Starts with the environment in the homes, in the neighborhoods, in the cities. If you are neglecting the importance of education, you're opening the space for creating conflicts in the future. It is not by accident that many peace-building activities are focusing on adjusting the curricula and school books, the textbooks that our young children are having in front of them in the schools. And this is where you build the future leaders of your countries. So focusing on the peaceful coexistence, respecting each other's differences, learning to live with each other, learn from each other, and cherish each other's cultures and backgrounds would be one of the recipes to maintain long-term peace. The other area that we cannot underestimate is the role of the media, the role of the social networks. Unfortunately, good ideas like creating a social network that were meant to interact, to increase the interaction of the young people, have been abused for different causes, even here in the United States, in other regions of the world. So paying more attention into how our young people interact with each other within a country, with their friends from other countries, would be contributing to building characters that would learn to respect. Of course, they have to respect their own culture, but to respect the culture of their neighbors and to respect the culture of other people. It's not an easy task. If it would have been easy, we would have eternal peace by now. But we have no other choice than to continue trying, and hopefully, as history goes by, we will learn that conflicts and wars have not brought anything positive to any nation, even the nation that has won. You know, you have many examples in the history that nations that have won have suffered significantly. So there is no clear winner. There is nobody is winning from the war on a longer term. You just look at all these negative consequences in the personal lives of soldiers, their families. Look at what is going on in Syria today, for example. So even if one of the sides, whoever it is, wins, look at the next 20 or 30 years for the people that are living there, for those who have left their homes and those who are about to come back, and all the scars that have been left in their personal lives, in their neighborhoods, in their countries. So, as I said, focusing on culture, focusing on education and media would be the appropriate answer. Thank you. Thank you.